If the phrase stay in your lane was ever applicable in college football, we have found the exact time and place. In a recent interview, Gus Malzahn of UCF whined about the fact that his team wasn't part of the Big Three in the state of Florida. Now, you will rarely hear me say nice things about Miami and Florida on this channel. We're going to set the rivalry aside for the next few minutes, and we're going to talk about Gus Malzahn's comments. His exact quote was, "You, here, think about the Big Three," Malzahn said, of Florida, Miami, and Florida State. It's time for the Big Four. You look at the last 6, 8 years, we've been as good or better than any of those other programs. End quote. A lot of articles have been written and a lot of takes have gotten off about Gus's comments. The UCF coach obviously has ruffled a few feathers here, and of course, we take issue with it. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but I understand what Gus is doing. He is at the fourth of 4 colleges in the state of Florida when it comes to ranking, perception, recruiting, success, and so I get it. He's trying to take any angle he can to lift up his university. I don't even blame him for the attempt, but when you make comments like this, you certainly open yourself up to criticism. So let's talk about it. If you use the worst stretch of Florida State and Florida football against the best stretch of UCF football ever, which is what the last 6 years are, the overall records do show that UCF has more wins. What that doesn't factor in, though, is the level of competition. And we're not going to sit here and act like UCF would have the same record or even a comparable record had they been in the SEC or even the ACC. I don't think that UCF could consistently beat teams like Florida State, Clemson, Miami, UNC, Louisville, Pittsburgh, and more. The argument on its face is really rather a funny one. Florida State, Florida, and Miami have all had their challenges in the last 5 or so years. They've all replaced multiple coaches, and Florida State has had 4 straight losing seasons in that stretch. That's the first time that's happened in 5+ decades. UF has had back-to-back losing seasons for the first time in 40 years, and Miami hasn't been relevant at all except for maybe 1 year out of that stretch. So for Gus's argument to basically be, we've been really good while the rest of them have been down extremely bad, is really silly and really shallow. It's honestly like the little brother that gets to be in charge while the big brother is taking a nap. It is purely silly. You see, what the 6-year argument discounts is the 30 to 40 years of dominance that Florida State, Miami, and Florida have had on college football. Not just the dominance on the state of Florida, but the dominance on college football. For years, you had to either beat or go through Miami, Florida State, and Florida to win a national title. And that's just the way it is. Miami ran the 80s. Florida State ran the 90s. And UF did the unthinkable before Bama, maybe, winning 2 titles in 3 years. And what Florida was able to do, both in football and basketball, during the same stretch, is completely unheard of. Those teams were not just the team of the state. Those were teams of the decade in college football and college athletics. College football, again, ran through Florida State, Florida, and Miami for nearly 3 decades. You had to beat one of the big 3 or just be one of the big 3 to win it all. Not only that, the big 3 played each other year after year after year. Obviously, FSU plays both every single year, and Florida and Miami have played each other a ton over that span as well. It discounts the Heisman winners. It discounts the All-Americans. The 6-year argument discounts the NFL draft picks. And it discounts all of the history of 3 pretty historic programs. There just aren't states that can put up 3 relevant elite teams at the same time. We've never seen that in college football before. And that's what made the Big 3 so unique and so special. Florida State competed in the 1998 championship. Florida State competed in the 99 and the 2000. Miami competed in the 2001, couple of years before that, Florida won it in 96 when Florida State was in it. And then just a few years later, Florida was in it 2 of the next 3 years. There was like a 10-year stretch where Florida, Florida State, and Miami were in it 8 of the 10 years. And those were real championships we're talking about, not paper, fake championships that you just claim for fun. We'll talk more about that later. Now, I know that UCF fans love to bring up the fact that they beat a UF team without a coach just a year and a half ago in the Gasparilla Bowl, a bowl game that several UF players sat out, and a game that UF had zero motivation to be in. And let me tell you, I'll give you this, UCF fans. I'm thrilled that you won that game. I remember where I was. I was at Busch Gardens in Tampa, Florida with my family, waiting in line for rides, watching it on my phone, and ecstatic that you guys won that game. But if you're seriously considering that game to have more importance than UF's 3 national titles or their 8 SEC championships in the grand scheme of things, I think you're out of your mind. Here's what FSU, UF, and Miami all have in common. It's a respect for each other's programs, and maybe not on a micro level. I know that we fight amongst each other and we hate each other. But on a macro level, there's a championship level respect that each program has for the others. There's an acknowledgement of expectations to compete for and win championships, not fake championships, actual championships. And before UCF fans line up the comments with tears, I'm not talking about obscure championships that you find in some byline of a record book. I'm talking about a real championship where you play for it all against the very best and you win it. Again, I get what Gus is doing, and I don't even disagree with his tactic, but stupid comments deserve to be called out. I do want to give some love really quickly to our friends and our partners over at Gramco. If you're a Florida State, Florida, Miami, or UCF fan, go to Gramco, thegramco.com. Use code TJ25. You'll save 25%. Hey, if you're part of the Big Three, this deal is especially for you. If you're still outside the Big Three like UCF fans, you're certainly welcome to try this deal as well. Maybe it'll help you take a bit of a chill pill, get some Delta 8 in your system, and calm down. But again, for the Big Three fans, Florida, Florida State, Miami, go get you some Gramco today. You guys know about them. You've heard about them. They're the best on the market. Thegramco.com, TJ25, for all of your Delta 8 needs. 6 years of having a better record than teams in the Big Three does not undo 11 championships, 8 Heisman winners, and nearly 2,000 football wins. Combined, that's what the Big Three has. And for the record, UCF will need to beat their Vegas win total in 2023 to even get their 200th win this season. You'll not find many videos where I say good things about Miami and Florida. We have a good time on this channel giving fans of other teams a hard time. But it's almost like a brotherhood. We control and pick on each other, but don't come at this Big Three and think that you can upset the apple cart. There's way too much history for 6 good years in the American Conference to all of a sudden undo all of that. Florida State, Florida, and Miami are on a different playing field than UCF. There's a pecking order. There's a difference in expectations. We recruit differently, and our programs are just built different. It's the truth in every state. We've never seen a state like Florida that had a legitimate Big Three that was recognizable across the entire country. You don't see Coastal Carolina making a play to take shine away from USC or Clemson. You don't see Texas Tech trying to encroach on Texas A&M or UT. You don't see UAB trying to join the ranks of Bama and Auburn. And when Gus was at Auburn, you certainly didn't see him campaigning for UAB to get the same kind of recognition that those 2 massive schools did. And UCF isn't going to be part of some mythical Big Four. It's cute. It's nice for them to have admiration, but it's just not happening. And Gus Malzahn knows this. Gus Malzahn was on the sideline when he went up against one of the most prolific teams of all time in the 2013 Florida State Seminoles. I assume if you're watching the video this far and you've stayed tuned in with it, you remember, and you probably are a Florida State fan at this point, you remember that night in Pasadena, January 6, 2014, where Florida State dominated the 35 minutes of the game that they were able to call without Gus Malzahn knowing the signals. He knows what true championship level football looks like. He knows what it's like to go in and win against your rivals like Bama and Georgia and get huge victories. He knows what it's like to win an SEC championship. He knows what it's like to be on that sideline and take on the Noles. He knows what it's like to reach the college football mountaintop. And he also knows that UCF's not anywhere close to that. UCF is 300 wins behind the next closest team in the Big Three. It would take them 100 years to catch up. And that's just not something that they're going to do. It would take them 3 decades to potentially catch up in championships if they were to just win one every 10 years. And I don't think that's something that they're going to do either. I think by going to the Big 12, they will see a bump and they will see an increase, but there is no chance that the expectations at Florida State, Miami, or Florida are anywhere close to UCF's. I was on Bill King this morning, and he asked about recruiting and the chances that UCF gets a little bit of a bump by going to the Big 12. And I said, yes, I do think UCF will recruit better. But Florida State finished with a top 20 recruiting class last year. It finished at number 19. And Florida State fans are pissed about that. Miami and Florida fans have trolled Florida State for having a top 20 class. And let me tell you something, UCF would give anything to be in the top 20 of recruiting. The expectations are just completely different. Every year that Florida State, Florida, and Miami do not finish with a top 10 class, they're disappointed. Every year that Florida State, Florida, and Miami do not win the ACC or the SEC or a national championship, they're disappointed. UCF throws parades for make-believe championships. It's just different, and it always will be. Speaking on recruiting, Florida State is on the verge of some big-time recruiting news, and we'll get you caught up. You can check out the very latest by clicking right here and finding out everything you need to know.